All right. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Alex Wilson. I've really enjoyed LED 680. It's so weird to think that we're almost done. So, keep your chins up, everybody. We are almost there. Um, I first off, I just wanted to give a little bit of an introduction. I and I don't, mind sharing this because it's a journey I've just kind of walked and I'm really comfortable talking about it. But um, one of my subject of study for my thesis, my capstone is basically what are the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy that exist or are present in organizational leadership or like organizational development. And what does that look like? Cognitive behavioral therapy is the frontline treatment for anxiety disorders. And I currently have OCD. I think I've had it my whole life, but just in the past 5 years, I've gone to therapy for it. I take medication for it. And cognitive behavioral therapy absolutely changed my life, mainly because it's just made me so aware of who I am and what I've done and just all of the incorrect kind of thinking that I have. And what's interesting is that we have so many things that we would tell ourselves or that we would believe that are kind of incorrect. There's these like belief distortions that cognitive therapy talks about, and we control so much of our lives based on these distorted beliefs. And so when I was looking through a lot of my sources for my thesis, for the literature review, I just really came to notice that there are quite a bit that talk about self-talk and how we regulate what's going on inside as objectively as possible. I mean, as objective as we can be looking at ourselves, right? So the source that I'm kind of going to explain to you is called Thought Self-Leadership, the Influence of Self-Talk and Mental Imagery on Performance. It was a little bit of a long, um, it was a long article, so I tried to kind of like put it down into a small workable piece into this kind of 10-minute presentation. Um, Sorry if you keep hearing my printer. It's doing some sort of update and I can't really stop it. Um, but uh, we will go ahead and move on. The overall idea of this article talks about self-leadership theory, or as they define it, the process of influencing one's self. So here we go with this kind of model I kind of put into the presentation. Self-leadership theory is based off of two concepts that work together to create this theory. One of them is the principle of self-talk. The other is the principle of mental imagery. So both of these principles create the overall concept and idea that is self-leadership theory. So what is self-talk? I think just being in organizational leadership, we could probably make our own kind of assumptions. But as they define it, it's what we tell ourselves covertly. It's what we tell ourselves like mentally and internally. There are a lot of these like underlying beliefs that go through our head every single day. There's certain statistics out there that say you make a certain number of decisions every day. And overall, your self-talk is kind of what you tell yourself while you're making those decisions. An example of self-talk would be like, I know that when I get there, I'm going to keep a smile and a good attitude. That would be literally talking to ourselves internally. There are a lot of studies that reveal a strong connection with higher performance rates and the quality of self-talk, particularly in the fields of sports performance. I don't know if you guys watch the Olympics, but it's very common to see athletes do little rituals or say certain things before they go out and compete. And a big part of that is self-talk or mental imagery. There's two types of self-talk that people will normally have. There's rational and irrational self-talk. An example of self-talk that is irrational is, for example, like to be just completely ridiculous, I don't speak Japanese, right? So, a version of irrational self-talk would be like, I'm going to go to Tokyo on vacation for a week, and I'm really nervous about not knowing the language, but I know that within 48 hours, I'm going to become conversational. That is an incorrect belief, but that narrative that you're saying internally, that would be like irrational self-talk. A rational version of self-talk would be, I am going to go to Tokyo for a week on vacation, and I'm probably going to pick up a few phrases or words there that will be helpful for me in communicating with other people. That is rational. That's also a rational like assumption or a rational belief. The second kind of principle that makes up this thought self leadership is mental imagery. Mental imagery, as they define it in the article, is a method involving the rehearsal of a physical task in absence of observable movement. So in your head, you can think about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but you may be sitting in bed right now listening to this presentation. So we can imagine ourselves making this peanut butter and jelly sandwich and where we would go in our fridge and our cabinet to get the pieces that we need, and then cutting it and then putting it on a certain plate from a certain cabinet and then eating it, right? That's a mental image. That's something that we can conjure up in the mind. We have the power to imagine our desired results before we actually perform them. Again, when you run through a routine as a gymnast in your head, that's mental imagery, right? Simone Biles, I'm sure before she actually made her move, the Biles, right? She probably had to think about, okay, how many flips am I going to do here? Again, it's super common in the field of sports psychology, counseling education, and clinical psych. We know in organizational leadership that a lot of these social science principles walk hand in hand in what we're doing. That's usually why we're getting like an MS, because really organizational leadership is the social science. And one thing that my therapist taught me that is really strong with mental imagery, and it fuels, a lot of OCD problems, is that the body is very obedient to the mind. And you can will yourself into a panic attack as quickly as you can will yourself out of one. Your mental imagery, the things that you conjure up in your head, will stoke emotions and keep them at a certain rate until they come back down. And so ultimately, self-talk and mental imagery, at whatever level they are occurring, ultimately affect your performance. So, for example, negative self-talk and negative themed mental imagery will usually result in a negative performance. It's not unrealistic to think, you have all of these doom and gloom in your head. And when you go out and perform, AKA when you just speak and talk to someone as a manager, right? And you have all this doom and gloom in your head, the self-talk and the mental imagery that's going on is ultimately going to affect your performance. I think all of us have probably experienced something like this in our lives, right? Let me just do a time check here. I want to make sure. Yeah, okay. So this is an exercise that I kind of thought of. I experienced it in my own therapy, but it goes really well with this article. So what I want you to do is I want you guys to just kind of sit back and look in if you're in an office or a bedroom or your couch or wherever it may be. We're going to see if we can move things with our mind, right? So I want you guys to focus on an object near you. And I want you to conjure up the strongest feeling of belief that you possibly can. And I want you to focus all your internal energy. I want you to look at this object, and I want you, in your mind, to lift up the object, and I want you to spin it around and then put it back down without touching it. You're just using your mind. I'll give you a second. Nothing's happened, right? Right. So that is an example of how mental imagery, we've imagined this object moving and zooming around, right? And we have willed ourselves to do it, but nothing has happened. One of the main points of this article is that the quality of self-talk and mental imagery is greater than the quantity of self-talk and mental imagery. AKA, you have to believe it in order for it to work. Or you have to have at least some semblance of faith in oneself. But a big part of this just comes from recognizing it. Ultimately, a big part of thought self-leadership really is the recognition of emotion or the recognition of mood. While we're on this topic of the quality of self-talk and mental imagery is greater than the quantity of self-talk and mental imagery, there are a lot of factors that affect quality. And ultimately, kind of what I just said, self-talk and mental imagery are often controlled and dictated by emotions, which are often created by one's internally held beliefs, accurate or inaccurate alike. These are often maladaptive beliefs, so meaning a belief that's created as a result of you attempting to make sense of something. So, you stepped on a crack and you tripped. And so your maladaptive belief would be that every single time you step on a crack, you will fall and trip. So you avoid cracks at all cost in the floor, right? So maladaptive beliefs that are held internally as a result of things that one has experienced and thus understood as truth, either inaccurately or negatively, right? So self-talk and mental imagery are fueled by these internally held beliefs that we have. And thought self-leadership requires someone to face these head on. And so the only way that we can get our self-talk and our mental imagery to where we need it to be in order to be effective or proactive or quality, right? As a quality manager, we have to confront some of these issues. So these would be factors that affect the quality of our mental image and the quality of our self-talk. Mood is a huge factor. If you are in a work environment or in a organizational structure that creates a negative mood or has a negative feeling about it, that's going to affect the quality of your self-talk and the quality of your mental images. The thought types and the nature of your images can affect the quality of them. In CBT, we talk a lot about exposure therapy. So exposing yourself to the things that make you uncomfortable or the things that you'd like to change. A lot of times we avoid it, right? We've been bitten by a dog and now we avoid dogs at all cost. It's a maladaptive belief that, we were bit by a dog once and therefore we're always going to get bit by dogs if we're around dogs. So we always avoid dogs. And if the image of dogs in the mind and even the thought of being around a dog or someone says the word dog and you automatically have this negative association with it, that's going to affect the quality of your work as well that you do internally. Again, these internally held beliefs, kind of what I talked about with the dog, trauma, again, what I talked about with the dog, and these thought patterns. A thought pattern would be these negative assumptions that we have or these cognitive distortions that we have, right? So a thought pattern, I've listed a couple in this presentation, but another example of a thought pattern would be, when we are driving and we attempt to merge into the left-hand lane, we put on our blinker and someone sideswipes us. And as a result of getting into that lane, a number of thought patterns can occur in order for us to make sense or understand what is happening to us. So one thing we could think is that guy in the black car sideswiped me, so everybody who drives a black car is a jerk. That is an example of a thought pattern. Another example of a thought pattern would be, I was just injured while trying to merge into the left lane, so I'm going to avoid the left lane at all possible costs. And if I go into the left lane, more than likely something bad will happen to me, so I'm going to avoid the left lane. That thought pattern, we automatically jumped from 1 to 20, right? Rather than just saying, this person sideswiped me because they weren't paying attention and I was getting into the left lane. We've now created this thought pattern that automatically goes from instance and the beginning to the end with a completely inaccurate result, right? Um, Past experiences and perceived ability also affect our quality of our mental image and our self-talk. Um, there's this cognitive distortion called all or nothing thinking. For example, you get up and you attempt to speak in front of an audience and you totally bomb. So now you think, I bombed that presentation, therefore I must be the worst manager ever. No, you've predicated your entire management career and style on the fact of whether or not you could give a presentation. That's all or nothing thinking, right? I had to do well in that presentation or else I wouldn't be a good manager. Uh, that would be like a perceived ability or like a past experience, right? That kind of all or nothing thinking would affect how we do self-talk and how we do that mental image. Because if we've already had an experience where we bombed, it's very easy for us to conjure that up again. Um, and our past experiences of failure or success would affect our self-talk. Absolutely. Um, Again, I tried to, bring all of these things into focus from this article, but ultimately, thought self-leadership is about somebody who would like to attempt to practice this model. They have to adopt and change certain beliefs. If they go out there and they're like, I really want to, promote, but the only thing that's stopping me is X, Y, or Z. They have to go and look at, are there certain internally held beliefs or internal dialogues that need to change? Are they completely accurate? Have they been a result of negative thinking patterns or distorted beliefs? And then they need to adopt and change mental imagery and thought patterns, kind of what I just talked about. One of the things that I really loved about this was that it ultimately talks about we identify so many things within ourselves, and it's up to us to do the hard work to identify, is it accurate? Is it not accurate? Is it something that I can control and manage, or is it something that I can't control or manage? And what can I do? It's us saying, I understand that I may be getting in the way of myself, right? And I am willing to do the work to change and do what I need to do to coach myself mentally and internally to get to where I would like to be. One thing that my therapist would often tell me, and I talked about this article with her, she always says that we have to look at not necessarily what is right or wrong, but what is the most accurate. And if we have these internally held beliefs of I'm not good enough, or I'm so good that I could never go wrong, or whatever it may be, right? We have these internally held beliefs. And we have to be willing to consider A, that some things may need to change, or B, that we could be wrong. And that by doing this work to create more accurately held beliefs, not necessarily right or wrong beliefs, more accurately held internal dialogues, more accurate mental images, and more accurate thought patterns, it allows us to work in real time with things that are actually happening. We often are our own worst enemies. And I think this thought self-leadership model, one of the things that I love is that they say often in the article, the process of influencing oneself. We understand that we ultimately are influenced by those things that we hold inside. And if we're willing to do the work to change them, we can continue to influence ourselves in the ways that we would like to be effective and to be productive. I hope this made some sense. It's a lot of concepts kind of thrown at once, but it's something I'm super passionate about, and I am looking forward to seeing how maybe we all take some time to look at those inaccurate beliefs and if we're willing to do the work to change it. Thanks so much.